Okay, welcome back to Kabuki Fox. Today we're going to be talking a little bit about the original Mortal Kombat game, my recollections of it, and a little bit about the actors Daniel Pesina, Richard DeVizio, Ho-Sung Pak. In fact, this is diverting my attention a little bit, so let's continue this over there. Hey, like I was saying, back in 1992, I discovered a little game called Mortal Kombat. Now, this was 1992. There were a lot of things that were on my radar at that point. You had Jean-Claude Van Damme movies like Kickboxer, you had video games like Street Fighter 2, Fatal Fury, and The Art of Fighting. And again, a little game called Mortal Kombat was on its way. I think the first glimpse I ever got of the game itself was in a video game magazine from the UK. It was misspelt as Martial Kombat. I remember the screenshot was of Scorpion and Sub-Zero in the throne room. And it just looked like a generic sort of one-on-one fighting game. A lot like the things you were getting on Commodore computers and the old IBMs and things like that. Little did I know what substance the game was actually going to have when it came out. My first encounter with it was at this old video rental place that I used to frequent a lot when I was like 3 or 4. My mother and I used to walk past this video store when I was quite young, when we were going to my grandparents' place. It was one of those shops that was always there. It was the place where we had originally borrowed The Karate Kid on new release overnight rental. I recall seeing giant display posters of movies like Revenge of the Ninja and Pray for Death. They're quite vivid in my mind. This was when ninja films were, dare to say, almost mainstream film. So this video store had a couple of Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition machines in the corner, which was nothing new, those games were everywhere. But eventually they got the Mortal Kombat cabinet in. You know, the nice red one with martial artist Daniel Pesina down the side. And I recall there was a crowd of older kids that were gathered around this cabinet. I remember seeing glimpses of this game and it was just incredible. The graphics was something different. You see, that's what did it for me. The creepy elements all came together. The sounds, the backdrops, the characters. It all came together. It was like a perfect fit. There was a kid that was playing there. He was playing Raiden. He was knocking people into the pit. You know, he was doing fatalities to characters. I'd seen some of the other characters that were listed. Scorpion was one that really stood out. I liked the whole spear thing. And I never did get a chance to play it because there were so many people gathered around this machine. So yeah, encountering that machine, encountering that cabinet at that point in time, had a big effect on me. Not that I started walking around the streets electrocuting people till their heads exploded. It was just a multimedia extravaganza and I loved it. I'd sit down with my sketchbook and I'd draw scenes from the game. And it was only through the martial artists and the martial arts aspect that this game came together. Guys like Daniel Pesina, Carlos Pesina, Richard DeVizio, Ho-Sung Pak. These guys knew their business, they knew their stuff. It wasn't until many, many years later that I found out that it was actually Daniel Pesina who was choreographing a lot of the movements, the fight movements that you see in the game. He was always kind of left out to the sidelines. It was always Ed Boon and John Tobias that were getting all the fame and credit, which is fair enough. It's their game and they're the ones that made it. But you know, you've got to give credit to the martial arts aspect and the guys that contributed the martial arts knowledge to get such a good game. Of course, shoot forward a little bit, the games were released on home consoles. My console of choice for Mortal Kombat was the Super NES, which unfortunately had the blood omitted and the fatalities were changed. It visually looked better than the Sega Genesis version, but it didn't play as well. This was the first game that really started upsetting people in terms of violence and gore. People really started taking notice at this point. And Mortal Kombat was the game that was responsible for the rating system that you have in gaming now. The game was released in September on Mortal Monday. It was the first time that I'd ever taken notice of a video game release date, and it was quite hyped up. It was going to be released on Sega and Nintendo consoles. Now obviously what seemed to happen a lot with a lot of Mega Drive titles or Genesis titles back in the day was their release dates were rushed, so the games weren't as polished off as they should have been. So the Mortal Kombat version on the Sega Mega Drive came out quite choppy, quite ugly to look at, which is a shame because the gameplay elements were there. So here I was, you know, I was saving up my money. I think I paid $130 Australian for the game. This was money that I saved up. The day that it was released was a school day. So my father, being as generous as he was, secretly went down to one of the shops to buy the game for me during the day. I remember him talking about a conversation he was having with the girl behind the counter. And she said, "Oh, is this for your son?" "Oh yeah, I'm not allowed to sell this to you, it's for mature audiences only, 15 plus. He said, no, it's alright, I'm buying it. So he bought it, brought it home, he left it in front of my TV in my bedroom, you know, one of those old wooden TVs. And I'd come home from school and I'd walked past my bedroom and sure enough, there was the Mortal Kombat box sitting in front of my TV. A real good memory, obviously quite vivid still in my mind. And yeah, took the cartridge out, put it in, booted the game up, and even though it was missing the blood aspect and the gore, I still loved it. You still had all the characters. Elizabeth Malecki, Daniel Pesina, Carlos Pesina, Richard DeVizio, Ho-Sung Pak. Although a lot of people were disappointed with the game, I wasn't disappointed at all. And I loved that game. During my high school years, I used to go home and have lunch with my father. And then after we'd finished eating, I'd put on Mortal Kombat, play that for a little bit. I'd go back to school, I'd be hyped up on Mortal Kombat. I'd still have the music going in my head. It was great. They were good memories. During my high school years, because I'd played so much Mortal Kombat, it was almost like I knew the actors in the games. It was almost like I'd gone to high school with these guys. It was almost like I'd gone to high school with Daniel Pesina and Richard DeVizio. These guys' features were so familiar that when I see them in photographs back in the day, it almost feels like I'm looking at high school photos to some degree. Now, the main element that really hooked me in the first two games were the guys that were involved. Again, Chicago-based martial artists like Richard DeVizio and Daniel Pesina. By the time Mortal Kombat 3 had come out, now a few things had happened behind the scenes regarding Daniel Pesina. Daniel was no longer with the Midway group by the time Mortal Kombat 3 had come out. And there were a few other things that had gone on with a few of the other actors as well. Therefore, by the time Mortal Kombat 3 had come out, Johnny Cage was no longer in the game, Liu Kang was replaced. I think Richard DeVizio was the only original guy that was left. And suddenly there was an element that was missing from the games. The choreography was no longer the same. This game did not appeal to me whatsoever. I played it, but it didn't have the impact that Mortal Kombat 1 and Mortal Kombat 2 had. So again, shooting quite far ahead into my working life, I encountered a guy that had started working with us, very familiar. Turns out that he was actually the guy that owned the video store that had the Mortal Kombat machine that I'd encountered that very first time. It's only through stories that I found out that this video store was actually being used as a mafia-related front, which was something that I was not aware of. And when I'd mentioned the Mortal Kombat cabinet to him, he recalled it as, oh yeah, we had those in the store to conceal a trapdoor that was underneath the floor that had dirty money in it. So after hours you had gangsters that were actually coming into the premises and getting their money from underneath the Daniel Pesina machine. Look, it doesn't really taint the memory of my first experience with Mortal Kombat, although it does make an interesting story. So yeah, like I was saying, again, the biggest element to these games was the martial arts aspect, and it was only through guys like Richard DeVizio, Ho-Sung Pak, and Daniel Pesina that this could have been achieved. So, reaching out to Daniel Pesina, hopefully we can have a bit of a chat about something, and we might have something special for you guys coming up very shortly.